diverse, including national governments, states and provinces, tribes and First Nations, cities and ports, as well as science networks, industry partners, local academia, and other associations. Just to give you a breadth of the types of scales that we need to be thinking about addressing ocean acidification through. And really what we're trying to do is to convene governments and other actors to think about the things they can do to better understand and address ocean acidification. Specifically, that includes reducing carbon emissions, the #1 cause of ocean acidification, which is one of the reasons it's so important that we talk about ocean acidification here at COP and through other climate frameworks. We, of course, want to advance the scientific understanding and knowledge around climate ocean impacts at a coastal and regional scale, and that's what Pene will talk about a little bit more of how that has happened in Tokelau. We want to reduce local pollutions that can exacerbate coastal acidification from land, continuing to think about protecting coastal communities through adaptation and resiliency building strategies, which again, Pene will talk about what that has looked like in Tokelau and other locations around the Pacific. Expand public awareness, and then really sustain this international, multilateral momentum for thinking about integrating ocean across climate commitments. And to do that, what we've done is created this notion of an OA action plan, and that's what we want governments to commit to when they join the alliance. And really, this is just a policy approach that can include many different things. There is no one-size-fits-all. Indeed, some governments have thought about ocean inclusion in their NDCs or national adaptation plans and strategies. Others have thought about incorporating ocean or ocean acidification into national ocean policy, or something a little bit more concrete regarding fisheries management, aquaculture, shoreline, coastal restoration. Those are all things that an OA action plan can pertain to. And really, it's our view that by creating this OA action plan, we really want governments to better take stock of local and regional vulnerabilities to ocean climate change. We want to be able to connect the science in the region to management and community concerns directly. That ideally will help us prioritize studies. Of course, we all need money, so we want to strengthen public and private funding for ocean acidification-related projects at different scales. And then finally, we want to show how ocean acidification help support some of these existing high-level commitments made through things like the UN Sustainable Development Goal Agenda, the UNFCCC, CBD, and otherwise. And so to help us do that, of course, we have a lot of OA science in the world. We have a lot of scientists working on this issue. But we really want to make sure that there's a feedback loop between science and policy application and local management application. So in order to do that, we've really tried to hone in on what do policymakers need to know to even manage for something as big as ocean acidification. And here's just a couple pictures from partners across SPREP, including Tokelau, presenting at COP24 and 25. And so, of course, policymakers want to get real really quick, right? So they want to talk about what are the species, economies, and communities that might be impacted in my region. What's their significance economically, culturally, or subsistence-wise? What about finfish? We talk a lot about ocean acidification on shellfish-forming species, but finfish also might have direct or indirect impacts relative to food chain, in addition to other behavioral issues. And then, of course, reef ecosystems. Ocean acidification is one more added stressor in addition to warming, bleaching, and loss of oxygen. And so how do we think about multi-stressors affecting reef ecosystems? And then this is where we go with, is there anything we can do now? And our main message is that, yes, we need to reduce carbon emissions, but there are things governments and institutions can and should be doing now that focus on advancing that science and knowledge, managing stressors, building adaptation and resiliency pilots and case studies locally, and that we can acknowledge uncertainty. We don't know everything, but that shouldn't be a barrier for building motivation for further action and integration at a domestic and international level. And I won't belabor this point, but I think what we really want to hone in on is what's most at risk and why. Are there local conditions, locations, industries, communities that are going to be more resilient or more at risk? And how can science have a practical applicability at home? Okay, I'm going to go for time. So I just want to set the scene of how that has happened, at least in my understanding, through leadership, including SPREPs. So in 2015, as part of the New Zealand Pacific Partnership on Ocean Acidification, SPREP, Pacific Community, and other partners commissioned this Pacific Islands Ocean Acidification Vulnerability Assessment. And that's massive. There are so few places around the world that have done that and that have really put the effort into thinking about ocean acidification uniquely from a vulnerability and risk perspective. And so this is a really foundational document that I'm hoping other governments, I point to this document frequently to inspire other governments to think about a starting point for action. And here's just a snapshot, some high-level findings about how that report thought about risk ranking assets, their regional importance, and then vulnerability to climate ocean change or ocean acidification. And that, again, just starts honing in on how you might think about priority actions, priority projects, science, because you can't do everything all at once, again, as we mentioned. And one thing that the New Zealand Pacific Partnership on OA really did exceedingly well, starting with that vulnerability assessment, then moved into some of the local monitoring pilots, as well as adaptation and resiliency building strategies in partnership with local community. And I think that's what Penny is going to talk about, so I'm not going to go into that detail. But I want to say that one of the things that produced also was this publication by SPREP, Mainstreaming Ocean Acidification into National Policies, a handbook for Pacific Islands. And it's a really comprehensive document that talks about ocean change in the region and different international frameworks as well as domestic policies where you could integrate ocean acidification, science, mitigation, and adaptation. And then just under the leadership of New Zealand, chairing the Ocean Acidification Working Group of the Commonwealth Blue Charter, just this year, they released a very comprehensive policymakers handbook for addressing impacts of ocean acidification. And I really encourage everybody to check it out through the Commonwealth Blue Charter. It's an amazing asset and truly groundbreaking for governments and for policy leaders thinking about this moving from science to action on ocean acidification. And that is directly because of the leadership shown through SPREP, through Tokelau, through New Zealand, bringing this discussion together. And then finally, just of note, as recently as May of this year, SPREP, along with partners, hosted a Pacific Islands Ocean Acidification Monitoring Dialogue. And that brought together several governments in the region, at least 10 or 11 governments represented in the room, reporting out on some of their monitoring work and continuing to make recommendations about how to continue the work of the New Zealand Pacific Partnership on Ocean Acidification and what the next iteration of a community of practice might look like. It was 2 days, incredibly impressive, and I really look forward to following that work and seeing what it will continue to yield from a policy application perspective. So with that, I'll turn it over to Pene to talk a little bit more about what that has all looked like in Tokelau specifically.
Thank you very much, Jessie. And before you pick up the baton, I need to say that in addition to hearing from Pene, we will also be hearing remarks from the Director General of SPREP, Tangaroa Cooper, who will close our event after Pene. Thank you, Tangaroa. Thank you, Pene. The floor is yours.
Maloni, kia ora tātou. My name is Pene Hurolefale. I'm the Senior Climate Advisor to Tokelau. I'm presenting, well, I can't see. Something's Oh, finally got it. I'm going to present on the Tokelau Ocean Acidification Project, specifically on marine assessment, coral restoration, and monitoring in Tokelau. I have to say right from the offset that I'm not a coral reef or a marine person at all. I'm a climate guy. So I'm presenting results of the work that was carried out by a consulting firm from Australia that helps SPREP to put it together. So it's not my area of expertise, but I'm trying my best to bring the key results. I will go through quickly the introduction to the project, methodology use, results and discussion, then go to the recommendations, important the community engagement, and then the conclusion. Quickly, while most of us in the room knows where Tokelau is, that's from seen from space, astronauts. We're about in terms of the region, and some very quick stats about Tokelau. I'm very keen and interested in the one that I highlighted because that's my work in terms of like the total amount of all greenhouse gases, all sources in 2019 when we did our greenhouse gas inventory. And it's 4.3 gigatons of CO2 equivalent, contributing to about 0.005% of New Zealand gross emissions. So Tokelau, interestingly enough, their total emissions, not even in the threshold, minimum threshold of the greenhouse gas that is satisfied under the paragraph 37P of the UNFCCC reporting guidelines. So it's a very insignificant, even the IPCC guidelines did not even pick it up, how small it is in terms of emissions. And yet they do a lot at home to be able to help with the climate program. The challenges we already know. This is from the IPCC AR6 just been released, and changes to the ocean, I quote, including warming, more frequent marine heat waves, ocean acidification, and reduced oxygen levels have been clearly linked to human influence. And of course, these changes affect both ocean ecosystems and the people that rely on them, and they will continue throughout at least the rest of this century. So how did Tokelau respond to the climate change issue? We set about doing in 2016 putting together what we call Living with Change, an integrated approach. And those are available online. And one of the projects in the LIVC implementation plan is what we call the Climate Resilience Investment Pathway 3.2, focuses on increasing resilience to climate change and ocean acidification. So that's where this project fits in. The three atolls of Tokelau, mainly all three are involved in the project. So it's Whakaofo, Atafu, and Nukunonu. Nukunonu is the bigger of the three islands. I'm going to focus only on Whakaofo because there were 36 sites that were assessed. So I don't want to go through all the 36 sites, but going into just Whakaofo alone, that gives us a really good idea of what's going on in the other atolls as well, because there were 19 sites that was looked off. The other thing about Whakaofo is you can pick sites on the lagoon side, but then also on the ocean side, and then give you a good idea of how the human influence, where people living in the lagoon side versus perhaps the natural environment on the ocean side. Also the advantage of the Tokelau, they did in 2004 survey and resource management plan. So corals were already included, and all the other factors that may need to set up the baseline to be able to measure how corals and the ocean itself responding to the changes, not only in temperatures, but also the human induced changes. So how did they go about? This is what the assessment team do, is why do coral restoration matters? And clearly those four areas satisfied what it needed to be done. The other area is how sites Joshan, so there's a good indication of like you need good circulation, some loss of corals and so forth. We go straight into the results now. And this is the lagoon side. I'm only going to show a few slides from the actual assessment. And this was carried out in November 28 to December the 12th, 2019. And with all the analysis they've done, I have no idea how they did it. But they did not recommend replanting of the corals and so forth, because it was sufficient enough, the corals already in the site, to be able to replant any new corals. So the message is they're very healthy coral as it is relative to 2004. The same with this other site as well. It wasn't recommended. It was very good, healthy coral environment. The same here. The site that I picked, they also show very healthy indeed. On the ocean side, it's different altogether, and that's where I'm interested in whether it's to do with the global changes taking place or the local factors override a lot of the bigger issues that we're discussing. And it's interesting, again, it wasn't recommended as one of the sites on the ocean side, and it's much healthier than those that were in the lagoon side. The same here, in similar area, and really healthy. So I'll just go through the sites. So what it's telling me personally when I read the reports is that very much the changes taking place are localized, based on the human impacts rather than the global scale. But I'm not familiar with how you sort of apply what's the global models to the local situation. So the recommendation from the monitoring team is like we need ongoing monitoring, continued restoration, and the implementation of fisheries and conservation measures. So in conclusion, this is the key conclusion. The terms of reference call for coral restoration to enhance reef resilience. The question they pose is this resilience to coral bleaching and ocean acidification so that the heat stress and low pH do not further reduce coral cover, or is it resilience to both global and local disturbance events such that fisheries productivity and other ecosystems are maintained afterwards? The answer is that both heat stress and low pH resistance and diversity are important, and that is why the focus of coral restoration will be on varieties that are rare but formerly abundant. Let me bring up one key component of the project is community engagement. And the project runs a national school ocean acidification poster competition, and it was presented to all the 3 taupulengas, or the chiefs, ongoing sustainability of the Tokelau ocean acidification. So I'll show you some of the winning posters from the schools. It's really amazing. This one here was the overall winner. Clean ocean. A clean ocean can also mean a healthy body and a healthy mind. This one here is like a goddess of the ocean, and what is happening in the environment. Very creative design. And this is the third poster that came third overall, saving our ocean. It's our home. And I sort of like wanted to reflect on this. This is what the Ulu of Tokelau said in July about how they think in terms of like the policy, ongoing international stuff. So I don't want to read it all out. These slides is available for everybody if you want to have a look. But what it's saying is Tokelau always support initiatives that draw attention to the nexus between oceans and climate change. We support the concept of healthy ocean to racket up ambitious climate actions well above those already pledged under the Paris Agreement. Some final thought. The woman that leads the program based in Samoa, Jewel Tuitama, she sent an email to me, and this is what she said. As we draw near towards the end of our project, we hope and pray that opportunities will continue to open up through you, our amazing partners in the future, to keep the momentum going for our oceans work in Tokelau. With that, I have to bring up all the partnership that make the project a successful one. Partnership, it was key to where we are today. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Penny. I think I'd just like you to notice these children who've been involved in coral planting themselves. We've got various other products, movies and videos that can show you just exactly the nature of this leadership of Tokelau that I was referring to earlier. But it's my honour to introduce Tangaroa Cooper, who is the Director General of SPREP, who will make the closing remarks for this session. Thank you, Tangaroa.
Ambassador Kay, and also our distinguished speakers. You rank me much higher, Ambassador, than I actually am. Just a small director of the climate change program. But I could get used to that.
I think I'm predicting.
Yes, I think you're quite prophetic. Thank you very much. I don't have any prepared closing remarks. And I will tell you why. This project has been integral to the program that I work in. This project has embedded in the work of the Climate Change Resilience Program at SPREP, and it is sad to come to the end of it, and I am also positive that it's not the end, but I want to start by saying no project is successful without strong partnerships. And so the key to the success of this project has been a strong partnership of alliances with like-minded and associated scientists, organizations, universities, and the alliance of the OA Alliance. But more importantly, it has been successful because of the trust of the government of New Zealand. That trust that also extended at a time when COVID stopped us from going into Tokelau. And so we had to be creative and work remotely with Tokelau. And so I wanted to start there, to say that the success of this has been because of that partnership between Tokelau, between SPREP, who's the intermediary, and the people of Tokelau. And I think it's also key to note here that livelihoods are only meaningful and fruitful if your ecosystem that supports you is strong and healthy. And that's what the PPOA does. Thank you, Ambassador Kay. The PPOA has enabled the people of Tokelau to not just plan their own project, but also implement the monitoring and the planting. And so there is the true ownership from the community. And last night we had a side event that talked about how the Pacific is really a family, and climate change is everybody's business, because the person who wears the hat of the ulu of Tokelau is also a grandfather, is also a church leader, is also a village leader. And so there is no separation of responsibility. And I think this is why also this has been successful, is because Tokelau has viewed itself and this work as a holistic approach. And then it's not just words, and you hear that all the time, the holistic approach. But I also wanted to say, pick up, and Jesse mentioned that, you know, the drivers of policy. Well, the driver of policy in our context are the needs of the people. And the needs of the people is connected to the environment, because Tokelau, like any other Pacific country, are traditional. We are traditional people. We really look forward to upscaling. There's a strong interest by other countries to upscale this particular project and the way that it has been designed, because it works. So our goal is to seek support to upscale this and to replicate it in other Pacific Island countries. The fact that this project was planned involving the people of Tokelau is also its success. You can't implement a successful project if you don't plan it with the people it intends to benefit. So they owned it. The main meeting that Jesse referred to, they went further because of the learning of this project. We've never had a community of ocean acidification community practitioners come together. We have the FRDP that brings the climate change folk together. We have, together with the disaster resilience folk, and then we have science panels that support the Met desk, but we've never had a strong OA community of practice. They met in Maine with the Pacific countries and decided to develop a community of practice that will meet every year. They have a terms of reference, and so I see that with the investment of the government of New Zealand, with the trust in Tokelau and Kiribati and Fiji, and with the commitment of the countries, the PPOA has planted a seed. It has planted a seed that has created a community of practice that will be recognized within our institutions in the Pacific, and now it is up to them with our support. And like I said earlier, we're the vehicle to assist the work of building resilience in our Pacific community. So I just want to say thank you very much to the Government of New Zealand, to the support of the Principality of Monaco, to all of our technical partners, and most importantly to the people of Tokelau for also their commitment. And with that, I acknowledge you again, through you, Ambassador, to your government, our gratitude. And we do hope we can work together to design an upscale to the rest of the Pacific, and go after some much larger scale funding. This has been the seed that's given us the learning and the confidence. So I thank you. Whawhitai Te Le Lava from the Secretariat and the Pacific Met Desk.
So ladies and gentlemen, thank you to Penny, Jesse and Director Tangaloa, and thank you all for participating in this afternoon's session. Thank you.
What are your remarks? What? Sa alofa lava, mahalo elelei, nisa mpula, Maori, welcome. Warm greetings to you from the Pacific region. My name is Philomena Nelson. I'm the moderator for this important session. The Pacific Island countries are vulnerable to a wide range of weather, climate, hydrological, ocean, and other related environmental extreme and high impact events. In addition, the risks posed by extreme events are increasing as the Pacific region is particularly vulnerable to climate change. And it is likely that extreme events will become more intense and more frequent in coming decades. Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, friends, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to our Talanoa session, where we get to hear from our distinguished panelists talk about the plans and what is needed to ensure we have a weather-ready Pacific. I would now like to invite the Director of the Climate Change Resilience Program of SPREP, Ms. Tangaloa Kupa, for opening remarks and also to talk about the weather-ready Decadal program.
Hi Philomena and whawhataitele lava, and greetings to my distinguished co-panelists here. On behalf of the Secretariat of the Regional Environment Program, on behalf of the Director General, and also on behalf of the Pacific Met Council, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you all here today, and to those of you who are also online. My task here today is to deliver opening remarks. And I think what is important to start with is acknowledgement of the people who have journeyed from the Pacific, that have taken days to be here. And to acknowledge you and to commend you for your dedication in bringing our issues, our priorities, and our weather-ready plan to Glasgow. As I speak to you today, the Pacific is heading once again into the time of year where we make preparations as we start officially the cyclone season. This year, ladies and gentlemen, there are projected 12 tropical cyclones in the Pacific. Those are the projections. Those are based on modeling that our organization, in partnership with others, also work on throughout the year to gauge and to also help prepare the Pacific Island countries. In 2020 to 2021, Fiji was devastated by 2 severe tropical cyclones. This caused loss of life and property and widespread damage. Whilst in Samoa, it was badly affected by flooding and landslides. Economic losses to the Pacific region caused by the impacts of climate change, by tropical cyclones, droughts, flooding, and the like, in 2020 alone was estimated at $1 billion. We lost 71 lives in the Pacific. We know now that the weather extremes and events will become more regular. And so we ask ourselves, are we doing enough? Are we doing enough to protect our communities? Are we doing enough to build resilient communities that are the foundation of strong nations? And so the Pacific, for those of you who are not aware, has organized itself into the Pacific Meteorological Council. It is the first region to do so in a cohesive way, and as such, identified their priorities. The directors of all of our countries and territories in the Pacific identified their priorities. They developed a strategy and a work plan. One of the things that they mandated 2 years ago in the last Pacific Met Council meeting was they recommended and instructed the Secretariat of the Regional Environment Program to commission a study. And with the partnership of the Bureau of Meteorology Australia, a study was commissioned, and basically to look at that whole question, are we ready? Are we ready as a region? Are we weather ready? We have several small projects happening and some large-scale ones in the Pacific region. But on a whole and across all of our meteorological services, are we at a point where we have a robust network, network of infrastructure, as well as early warning system, as well as governance and policy? Are we at that level? And clearly, no. The study found that there is much to be done, and there are 5 pillars to that work that will come up in the presentation soon. So, ladies and gentlemen, following this, I will present to you what the key components of the Weather Ready Decadal program is. Fundamentally, the Pacific recognizes that it is not a 2-year project. It is not a 2-year small investment. It is going to take at least 10 years with a considerable investment for the Pacific to be truly weather ready. I'd like to acknowledge the WMO, and we thank you for your partnership. We thank you for the partnership of the WMO, the representative in Samoa, Henry, who is a constant member of the discussions and the dialogue in building the resilience within the meteorological services in the Pacific, and we acknowledge the investment of the WMO in the work that we do. I also acknowledge, he's now a very important PS in the Solomon Islands, but in another life, Chanel was also a member of the meteorological service. And I acknowledge those of you who are online streaming in from the Pacific. And with that, Philomena, moderator, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to the Weather Ready Decadal side event. Whawhataitele lava.
Thank you very much, Director, for your kind remarks to welcome everybody to this side event. It's one of the most important program in our region, and this is an opportunity to talk to our partners and engage with them to secure the resources to ensure we have well-informed communities in our Pacific ready for any changes to the weather in the coming decades.
Thank you very much. And I present this presentation on behalf of our fellow colleague, the Director for Fiji Met, who is unable to be here in person today, but who I am sure has joined us online. This presentation is on his behalf and also on behalf of all of the Pacific Met directors. As mentioned earlier, the Pacific is highly vulnerable to hydrometeorological extreme events. Our economic losses as a region, annual average, is about $1 billion, estimated in 2020. We know that climate change will exacerbate extreme events. We have been working with disaster risk reduction, early warning system service providers and experts, because we recognize that the Met services cannot do this alone. We realize as a region that there are critical gaps in our national meteorological, hydrological services, and those gaps are in governance systems, networks, predictions, etc. The Weather Ready Decadal program, investment program, has taken movement, has moved considerably from an idea and a recommendation in PMC to reality. Next slide, please. This program was developed and then peer-reviewed by the Met and Hydrological Services. It was a very deep look at what it's going to take to make the Pacific services transformational, what it's going to take to lift the game across all of the Pacific to where it needs to be and not have ad hoc approach to it. And so we have this investment plan. This investment plan was endorsed by the Pacific Meteorological Council, and it was subsequently taken to the highest level of decision-making and authority of the region. It was presented and championed by the Kingdom of Tonga at the Forum meeting 2021 this year. And at the 51st Pacific Leaders meeting in August, our leaders gave this weather-ready plan of investment its highest endorsement. What does that mean? That means that as a whole, the Pacific region's leaders put their stamp to this plan that this is what we need. So this, to the world community, to the global community, is what the Pacific needs. So if you want to help the Pacific and be truly transformational, there needs to be investment in this very thorough, well thought out, contextualized and relevant plan. It is a program of the Weather Decadal Program Initiative will enable Pacific Island states to anticipate, prepare for, and respond to extreme weather, water, and ocean events. This is a 10-year program. This is not a small project. And the reason why it is a 10-year program is because the Pacific has learnt through many years of implementing projects that they need to be sustainable. And you cannot start an investment, a project like this and approach it in piecemeal. So it is presented as a full investment of what it's going to take the Pacific region to the level it needs to be at. It is valued at $166 million US. And that might seem like a big number, but over the period of 10 years, it isn't. It is an investment that needs to be viewed as an investment and does not take into account what the Pacific countries bring as additional resources and technical expertise to the plan. It was commissioned at the Council for the Pacific Met, Council, sorry, in number 5 in 2019. And our partners, all of our Met directors contributed to this exercise. This program will focus primarily on protecting communities, supporting economies, strengthening security, and enhancing the connectivity of the region to the global meteorological systems. What does it look like? This investment plan has 5 pillars.